All right, today, guys, when you've got the wheel off and you're looking at the front end, this is a Cobalt here, a 2009. One of the things you want to take a look at and inspect are these struts and the spring. And you can see this struts looks pretty good. He's got a light surface corrosion look to him. What you're looking for is that he doesn't have oil running down from the strut itself. And then when you look at the springs, you're trying to make sure that typically around these lower two coils that they're not broken. So this guy looks okay, and I'm showing you this okay one because we're going to take a look at the other side on this is the passenger side. We're going to take a look at the driver's side that's not okay, just to kind of give you a comparison. So let's look at one that's not okay. All right, we can see on the driver's side, though, that it's not the same story. You know, so here we can't make out the corrosion because we've got this film of oil that's been running down. It's probably been running down for a while. But in particular, up here on the top part of the strut, we can see where it's actually still running and still wet and collecting road dirt. Now the spring's okay. We don't see any breaks in the spring. But when we see this type of oil running out of the shock portion of the strut, then we know that's a problem. One of the seals has gone. And this is also in conjunction with some noise in the front end when going over bumps. So this is most likely the source of that noise as well. What we're going to do is we're going to pull the strut out and we're going to replace it. And we're not going to replace it as a unit. We're going to replace it with GM factory parts, which means we're actually going to have to take the spring out and replace the inside strut. So I'm going to be showing you that technique for those of you that want to do that. So let's get started. But here's the part on the diagram here. It attaches to the front strut bracket here, and then comes down here on the bottom and attaches to the stabilizer bar itself. It's held in by two 18mm prevailing torque nuts. Now if we come over here and look at the shaft, this is what we're going to be doing. We're taking off this 18mm bolt here and then the other one down at the bottom. Just to show you what I ended up doing, you take a small 2x4, you can get this guy wedged in here a little bit on the tie rod and push him down just like this, just a little bit. You don't want to damage the bushing. You just want to push it down enough so that you can get your impact wrench, which you can see I've got down here, and you can come underneath. You know, I've got a couple of jack stands for safety reasons, and you can spin it right off. At this point, we've got this guy extracted. All right, with the stabilizer link out of the way, the next thing that we're going to do is remove these two 18mm nuts. There's one here and one here off these studs that are holding the knuckle. Once you get the nuts off, you can take this bracket that's holding the speed sensor. And you're going to want to get this guy out of the way because the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to drive these studs back out. So you want to get a hammer to do that. That's all it takes. And we're going to do the same thing on the bottom. Now, you want to prevent this assembly from falling so you don't damage anything with the CV joint or the boot. So you'll notice I got the tire sitting here to kind of catch the whole assembly here with the rotor when it falls, when I take out this next one. And again, just be careful you don't strike anything here. Sometimes you might need to get a punch to finish it the rest of the way if it gets stuck, which I should have had, but set it aside over here. That'll help get it the rest of the way out. All right, and then I just like to put the nuts back on the bolts so we don't lose them. At this point, what we want to do is finish separating this piece. Get it laying on the tire. Okay, and now we've just got the 3 bolts up here on the top. So if we come up here where the hood is, the only thing holding it on now are these 3 13-millimeter bolts, or nuts rather. And when I take the third one off, I'm not going to take it off all the way, just in case it drops down. Like you see right now, it's already coming down. And so at this point, you need to have a helper before you can take the other one out. You got to have somebody kind of hold this for you while you remove the other bolt. So I don't have that, so let me set aside for a second. I'm going to take the third nut out, and then we'll show pulling it out. All right, with that third nut removed, you can just take this guy right out. You can see this is the part that was going up into the under hood area. And then here's the part here that attaches down to the spindle. So this whole thing comes out as a unit. And a lot of aftermarket guys put these together and you just put it back on as a unit. But the way GM did it is you reuse the spring and you reuse the bearing and the top cap, and you just replace the strut assembly inside. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So this is a little bit more involved. So next thing we're going to be doing is getting this on a spring compressor. There's a couple of things I want to point out before we do that, though. Before you do anything with this, you want to take some notes of where things line up. Like, so for example, you've got this liner that's on the bottom, and you want to make sure that it's not damaged, because if it's damaged, as part of doing this technique, you're going to have to replace it. So we can see here this looks okay. Just kind of giving it a check around to make sure. The other thing you want to take a look at is to make sure this bellows is not ripped up. It's going to slide around like this, but you want to make sure it's okay. And then what you want to take note of is there's a tab here on this assembly. And this tab, you'll notice, is directly opposite this mounting piece. And this tab also faces the engine. Now I'm showing the driver's side here, but it'll be the same deal on the passenger side. Whether you're on the, if this orientation, this tab's facing the engine on the passenger side, this tab's facing the engine just like this on the driver's side. You're going to want to take note of that and take note of how that orientation is between these two pieces, because as we take this apart, this is all going to come into 3 separate pieces. This is bottom plate, there's this top piece, and there's a bearing in here, and you want to keep all this oriented the same way when you put it back together. So you're going to see me mark this underneath as to where the spring's set at the top, and then I'm also going to take note of where this tab was. All right, so let's get it on the spring compressor and take it apart. All right, guys, this is the kind of spring compressor I like to use. It's probably the safest one. It's very heavy duty. What you try to do is get the connectors here safety pinned around the highest spring coil that you can on the top and the lowest one that you can on the bottom. We obviously can't go any lower because we've got this metal base plate in the way, so we can't go any lower than that on this side. And then on the top, we got the same problem over here. So this is what we have to line it up with on this. And this is something that you can pick up at Harbor Freight. And the deal with these kind of things is you just don't want to use any kind of pneumatic or electric tools on them. This is something that you really have to just have the patience to do by hand with hand tools. That's what they recommend in the manual for this. And so all I'm doing right now is taking some of the slack out of it before I get ready to compress it, just so it doesn't rattle around on me as I move this around to show you some other things. All right, so we were talking before about taking some notes on where everything is. So I'm going to take this silver Sharpie. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to take note of, this is where I got the end of this spring. and I want to match it back up to that when I put it back together. I don't have to do that on the bottom, because if you see on the bottom, there's actually a cutout here. And the end of this spring needs to sit against that cutout in this recessed area. So that's easy to line up. You don't need to worry about marking that. Just take note of what it looks like. And again, the other thing I want to make sure of is that this tab's going to be opposite of this bracket area here. And by making that mark that we just did right here, that's going to ensure that piece. So the first thing to do is just to tighten it up. This particular one takes a 24 millimeter socket to work the spring. And when you're doing something like this, this is the most dangerous part of this job. So you just want to make sure that the spring is like this and that nobody's around. It's not facing towards you. Make sure it's like this so that if something goes wrong, it's going to throw the energy away from you. We're just going to tighten this down all the way until this piece gets loose. And then we'll come back and I'll show you, if you look inside here, there's a 21 millimeter nut, and the top of the shaft of the strut has a T45 Torx cutout in it, so that you're going to be able to stick something in there and hold it while you undo it. We'll show that after I get this compressed. So nothing much to see here. I'm just going to go ahead and keep working on compressing this, and we'll come back when I get it to the point for the next step. All right, guys, at this point with this particular type of tool, when we see it loose like this, we're done. So at this point, now we're going to turn our attention to removing this 21 millimeter nut. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Instead of a 21 millimeter, you could get a 13/16 socket on here. If you have a 13/16 kind of spark plug socket, you could put that on there. Use a open end wrench to turn it while you put your T45 in. I happen to be using myself the same tool that the dealer would use. So I'm going to be putting this tool on here, and then I'll be coming in here with a T45 to hold that. And then I'll just be able to come in with the same 1/2 inch socket I was using before and be able to turn this. Now I'm hoping it came loose because I just noticed my T45 broke off in there. That's not good. That's not good at all. Yep, there he is stuck in there. So there's always something. So let me wedge that guy out of there, and we'll pick it up in a moment. Unexpected. All right, so I'm not going to be able to torque this without replacing my tool that just broke here, my T45. But I think I can just get it off and we can continue on with an impact. So I'm going to put a 21 millimeter impact on here. See if that gets us anything, although I don't know if it will because this shaft's going to be turning on me with the spring tension released. So yep, I'm going to have to go ahead and wait until I can get a T45 in there. All right, without that T45, I'm not going to be able to torque it. Now let's see if we can go ahead and impact wrench this nut off. All right, so we got it off. So at least we can keep going. And what we'll have to do is we'll have to replace this T45 that broke on me with another one so that we can torque it down. But it's always a way to work your way around these kind of problems. Okay, so now we're going to take this top unit off as an assembly. Just kind of set it aside right here. And then we're going to remove the spring and the strut. So we're going to take this, and the rest of this is garbage because this is our bad strut. All right, guys, let me show you in the trunk on the service options sticker. It's on the driver's side in the trunk on how you figure out which of these struts you need. So the first code you're going to be looking for is this code that starts with an FE, Frank Edward, like this FE1 code on this particular Cobalt LS. And that's why the particular struts we went with, the part numbers I showed, are for this regular production option, RPO FE1. Some other codes you might want to take a look at are these 6 and 7 codes. Sometimes they'll show up, and if you look at the video description, I'll identify the different struts for the different codes like FE2, excuse me, FE3 and FE5, besides FE1 and some of these other numbers here. But this is where you'll find that information. Sites like Rock Auto, for example, are going to ask you what you see on this sticker. All right, so let's go back and continue. So I'm going to bring over here into the camera view what we're replacing it with. Now I'm going to show you how to go into your trunk later and tell what type of strut you need by the RPO codes. But for this one, it's a 207-95225 for this driver's side. And then if you're replacing the passenger side, and I do recommend you do them in pairs, it's a 207-95226. I've already put the driver's side, excuse me, the passenger side on. So, all right, so we're going to open this guy up. And all you're going to have in the box here from GM is the strut assembly itself. This is just kind of like some packing paper. If I can see the best way to cut it off right there. All right. And you have a new nut. So you want to discard the nut that was on the other one. So if we come back over here, so just so we don't get these mixed up, we're going to take our bad nut, we'll throw it in the box. The first thing I mentioned to you, you're going to salvage off of this guy is this bottom liner. This one's got a lot of dirt and stuff on it, so I'm going to want to clean it up, but it's not cracked and it's not damaged. And what you'll end up doing, like I said, I'm going to take this off and clean it, but you're going to end up installing this guy onto here. Whoops, wrong one. Onto here. He's retained in by those two tabs. And the next thing we're going to salvage off is this. Actually, this way. And then we're going to end up putting the spring back on it. And then we're going to end up putting these pieces back on it. So I'm going to stop, though, for a second because I'm going to want to clean this stuff off while we're in here. And clean this off, clean some of that off, and we'll come back. All right, guys, I'm just disassembling all this here. I'm just showing you, you want to get in here with some kind of a tool. I'm just going to use one of these Torx bits I had. And you want to try to get all the dirt and crud that's accumulated in here. This here is the bearing. You just want to kind of hold it in the position that it was in. But just showing you, kind of just get in here, and now's your chance to get all this kind of junk out of here. What's supposed to have happen here is these three openings are supposed to be clear so that water can drain out. So if you have some pieces of rocks, like this has got a small stone blocking it right now, probably have to get another tool or screwdriver. Now there he goes. Want to make sure that I keep these three all clear of any corrosion or debris. So you can see there's a lot of surface rust on this, but nothing that would prompt me wanting to replace it at this time. So we're just trying to clean it up, get a lot of that off of there. So I'm just going to keep doing that. You see I can already kind of clean this guy up, and what you're looking for here, those locking tabs are in place. It's not ripped or broken, in which case we can reuse this. And similarly, this top piece, and remember, as you're scraping this stuff, don't erase the marks you made. But again, this upper rubber is okay. And again, I'll put links to all these part numbers if you need to replace any of this stuff from GM. So we'll come back when I clean this up some more. All right, guys, we're ready to reassemble this now. I've got everything cleaned up. So we'll start with our liner. Snap that into position on the bottom. Next thing we'll do is we'll put our bellows in, and there's like a little kind of foam bushing or something on the end. You want to make sure that's still in there. And then the next thing is this assembly here. So what we did here is keeping our marks together, and we took this off and cleaned it. We cleaned all in here, made sure these drain ports are free. Just trying to keep our marks lined up. If I lift this off, there's a bearing here. We cleaned all the crud out of there. We cleaned this bearing surface out. We cleaned all the dirt out in there. If you happen to drop something and you get this where you can't tell what it is, at least if it's the original GM one. Right? It doesn't really have a good indicator, but you can kind of tell the small side of the seam, and the side that has the part number faces up, and the small side seam faces down if you happen to mess it up. Right? And then these two pieces fit together like this, and they're going to go on after we reposition the spring. Now we're going to take our spring, just going to kind of clean some of this crud off the bottom. Now remember, this is all because this strut was leaking, so it had all this oil on here, hydraulic oil, and it was just attracting all kinds of road dirt and grime. So that's the reason we have all this. All right. And again, even though you got this on the tool, you want to still treat it as a dangerous situation. I'm going to kind of rotate this around so we can get this sitting in that recess down there, right? So there's that little ridge, and it's sitting right there. And then we can kind of move this over like this, just temporarily. And then I can feed this whole assembly into position. Remember, we want to get these marks that we made lined up with the end of this spring at some point. Right now, we're just trying to get the basic pieces put back together. Start to put our nut on by hand a little bit. All right. So now we're going to need to tighten it up a little bit before we start trying to take the tension off the spring. Just getting an extension here so that I can take this 21 millimeter socket, do what I need to do to tighten it up by hand. All right, so again, you're going to kind of twist this around so that you've got this guy in this position back here where you need him to be. I'm just going to take some of this slack out of here with this nut by hand. Once you see the shaft turning, that's about all you're going to be able to do by hand. And then what I want to do is kind of rotate the whole assembly around. This old strut out of the way. And make sure that we got our pieces here roughly where they need to be. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start taking some of the slack out of the spring so that we can do the final assembly. So again, we're going to need to get a little bit more of this slack out of here. And since I busted that T45, it's going to be kind of hard. I might have to try to get a strap wrench or something in here for a moment, so let me go do that. All right, guys, I managed to put a little strap wrench in here, and if we take a look at the nut now, you can see that we've got the top stud part of the shaft, of the strut shaft sticking out of it now. So that's a safe amount of thread for us to begin releasing the tension off the spring. Now, normally what you do is you take that T45 and you'd take, this tool or whatever it is you're using, and you'd get it a little bit more than that. But that is a luxury I don't have right now. So if we come on this other side, I'm going to take our two marks that we made. We're going to slide it down, keep it lined up with the top of that spring. We're going to make sure that we're lined up with this spring here. And then we're just going to find the right socket here. And we're going to start taking the tension off this spring. And you just want to, like I said, you want to use manual tools, and you want to go slow. Other thing I'm kind of doing here is I'm making sure all my safety pins are still where they need to be. That's part of what's going to keep you from having any kind of an injury if something does go awry. And so this is going to take me a while. I'm just going to crank this guy back out. And what you're going to do is you're just going to keep watching that you're keeping this rear piece lined up for where it needs to sit right here. And you're just going to keep making sure that the top piece stays lined up with the marks that you made. Just keep checking and loosening as you go. So we'll come back when I get it near the end. All right, once we get the spring uncompressed and we get it off, right, you can see this is how far we've got it in position here. Don't worry about these things here because they'll turn with the bearing. But you want to make sure of that at this point we got our alignment correct with the end of the top spring, and we've got our alignment correct with the bottom spring sitting in the pocket that it's supposed to sit in. We want to make sure that opposite this bracket on this side we find our tab, and that looks like everything's ready to go. So let's go reinstall it in the car. All right, have a helper hold this while you get one of the nuts in up here on the top. And then just go ahead and get them partially going. Now these are prevailing torque nuts. You can reuse them as long as you're getting a certain amount of resistance. You notice I'm not able to turn this with my hand. I'll put in the bottom of the video, but it's so many inch-pounds that GM specifies that if you don't have that many inch-pounds of torque, that you have to get new ones. But as long as you do, you can reuse them. All right, so let's go down here and continue. All right, so now we can turn this. That's what the bearing's there for. Get this in position where it will line back up with this steering knuckle. And then we want to get one of our studs ready. I like to do the top one first, myself. Once you got one of them holding it, you can go ahead and get the next one in. Now you can see these are serrated on the ends. So when you start to drive them in, they'll automatically seat themselves. And you just have to drive them in until they're flush, and you'll be able to put the nuts on once you do that. Now sometimes you can't get it to drive all the way in, and that's okay, because when we do this, the nut will pull it in the rest of the way. You got a brake line here, so I prefer to use a punch in this position so that we don't cause any accidental damage. And see, in that bottom one, that's about as good as I've ever seen it with hammering. This top one is just a little bit stubborn, but like I said, when we put this stuff on here with the nuts, actually almost forgot before we put these nuts on, we want to put this bracket back on that holds the speed sensor harness in position. So to seat these studs, I'm going to go ahead and use an impact socket. We can go ahead and back it off and torque it later, if that'll be good enough to get started. What I'm doing right now is trying to find out where my 18mm socket ran off to. These guys like to go for a walk periodically. So let me come back. It must have rolled under the car. All right, guys, I found where this guy walked off to. And what you want to do is you want to tighten this down until you seat that stud. and then you can come back and torque it separately. So if we take a look at the service manual, this is the assembly procedure we're doing, the strut assembly replacement. So we've pulled it out, we've changed out the spring, and they talk here about doing the compression. There's the tool you saw me using, very similar tool to what they have. They obviously have a big fancy hydraulic press for doing the spring work. But what's of interest to us in the service manual are now the torque values. So those top nuts are 15 foot-pounds, those 3 prevailing nuts under the hood, 15 foot-pounds. These 2 nuts that we just hit with the impact wrench, we want to back them off and torque them to 89 foot-pounds now that we've seated the studs. And then we're going to go reinstall our stabilizer link. That's the last thing we're going to put back in here. And after we get that reinstalled, we're going to torque that guy down. Each of these 18 millimeter nuts is going to go to 48 foot-pounds. So I'm going to get all that stuff in, torque it up, butt it up, and we'll come back. All right, guys, last step. So we've got our new stabilizer shaft link. We're going to go reinstall it in here, and then we're going to torque it down to 48 foot-pounds. Right? So it doesn't matter which end. There's no specific end. So you can just take the nuts. I put the nuts on here so I didn't lose them. But we're just going to come over here. Like to install it on the lower piece first. And you can put one of the nuts on finger tight, just so it holds it into position. And then you can come over here and slide it in here. Now, one of the reasons why this is lining up for me is, and I always recommend you do this, always jack up both sides of the vehicle. Both, not just the side that you're working on, but the other side as well. Because that will take some of the tension off the stabilizer bar down here. And it'll be in the right position for you to move it around and get this guy in there. So all I'm going to do now is torque this up, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, we've got these 2 torqued down to 89 foot-pounds. We've got our stabilizer link back in at 48 foot-pounds. And then if we come up on top here, we've got our 3 nuts torqued down to 15 foot-pounds. The last thing we need to do is to torque the strut shaft down. And what we're going to end up having to do on that is we're going to end up having to come back and me finish this video when I've got that T45 replaced. But what we'll end up doing here is we'll end up coming in here and holding that down there so that we can torque this guy down as well. So I will come back and finish this in a couple of days when I pick up a replacement. And then I'll show you what the torque value is for here. All right, guys, we're at the end here to torque this guy up. We got it down as far as we could without torquing it. Now we're going to go finish the job. So besides this tool, I actually ended up finding out that I do have a T45 socket. So unfortunately, I grabbed one of those security bits, and they just don't have the strength because, there's a hollow hole in them. So that was my bad. This is what I should have grabbed as my regular T45. We'll use that, like I mentioned, to keep it from moving. And then we're going to do a 55 foot-pound of torque on this guy. And so you're going to have this where you're preventing it, so the ratchet in this direction, right? So you're going to have it where this is holding this while you turn it. You want to try and keep it kind of at this 90-degree angle until it pops, and then it's torqued. So that's it, guys. We've done both sides. We've replaced the struts, and we've cleaned it all up, and we've gotten the spring back on there, and now we've got this guy torqued back down to the proper foot-pound value specified in the service manual, which is 55 foot-pounds. And again, you want to do the torquing while it's under the weight of the vehicle. You can get it tightened down just short of that beforehand, but you want to save the torquing for this last guy while you've got it on the ground. I hope this video helps you out. If you've got any questions about this, or you just have some comments, or maybe you get some other things that you want to add to how you do it, go ahead and leave them down below. And if you found this useful, please remember to hit that like button, and thank you for subscribing.